What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? Today, we're going to be looking at my debate with Standing for Truth. If you guys don't know, I had a debate with Standing this Saturday on Modern Day Debate. We were debating creationism versus evolution. And so Standing brought his best evidence and I brought my evidence, and so I'm gonna let the debate kind of speak for itself, but at the end I will do kind of a final wrap up on my end, some things I didn't really get to address during the debate or whatnot. This portion's not going to include the Q&A, so if you want or are interested in the questions that were asked from the audience, you'll need to go to Modern Day Debate's channel, where he'll have the full stream up there. But we're going to go on ahead and get into the debate. If you're interested in the debate, then please stay tuned.
Okay, perfect. Well, let's get this party started. Been looking forward to this, so this should be fun. Tonight, biblical creation versus evolutionism, creation, Adam and Eve, the fall, and evidence. We constantly hear that there's no evidence for biblical creation and that evolutionary theory best explains our origins. For example, this quote from Frank Zindler from a debate with William Lane Craig, I believe it was, perfectly sums up the importance of defending biblical creation. What he said was, the most devastating thing, though, that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Now that we know that Adam and Eve never were real people, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. If there never was an Adam and Eve, there never was an original sin. If there never was an original sin, there is no need of salvation. If there is no need of salvation, there is no need of a Savior. And I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. I think that evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. A literal Genesis. Is this really true, this quote? Is there no evidence for biblical creation, Adam and Eve, and a literal Genesis? Genetic evidences for Genesis. There are three main events in Scripture, in Genesis to be specific, that we can address with modern genetics. The events are the creation of Adam and Eve, the flood of Noah, and the Tower of Babel. The Bible tells us that it's the history book of the universe. Starting with this as a basic assumption, we can test the Bible to scientific discoveries and see how well this fits. The Bible tells us that Adam is the father of all people. Genesis 2:7 says, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." We see no evolutionary history of mankind here. There is not even a hint at fish to fisherman, bacteria to biologists, evolution in this verse. According to the Bible, we were made perfect and in the image of God. Genesis 2:21-22 says, "And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. And he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman and brought her unto the man." We started with two people, one man and one woman. And these are very significant statements about genetics. Genesis 9:18-19, we read, "And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread." Like I said, the Bible tells us that it's the history book of the universe. Evidence here that refutes evolutionism and confirms the Bible. All human beings are profoundly similar genetically, and this points directly to Adam and Eve. If you only started with two people, that restricts the diversity today. Over deep time, it's obvious that any large population will most certainly accumulate enormous numbers of mutations, resulting in enormous amounts of genetic diversity. This is a serious problem for evolutionary theory because it is now clear that mankind has very limited genetic variation. While the observed low genetic diversity is a massive problem from the evolutionary perspective, this is most certainly expected and predicted from the biblical perspective. The Bible predicted this thousands of years ago. From the biblical base model, we all come from just two people, obviously, Adam and Eve, as we've read in the passages before in the previous slides. This obviously means that limited diversity is easy to explain. Like I said, the Bible predicted this. This means the death and demise of the evolutionary bottleneck theory and the evolutionary out of Africa theory. It is now clear and evident that there exists a singular female ancestor of all humans, which is referred to as mitochondrial Eve, and her basic DNA sequence is easily discernible and detected in humans alive today. And it is not more similar to a chimpanzee, contrary to what the evolutionists would have you believe. There is also clearly and evidently a singular male ancestor of all humans alive today, referred to and known as Y chromosome Adam. His DNA sequence is largely known, and contrary to what evolutionists believe, it is not at all similar to that of chimpanzees. Look at Noah's flood. What does this tell us? This story tells us that all people should be closely related. It tells us there should only be a few mitochondrial DNA lines as Shem, Ham, and Japheth's wives, and only one Y chromosome since it's only Noah. His 3 sons would have inherited his Y chromosome. And we should have significant evidence of rapid population growth. It turns out that this too is exactly what we find in modern genetics. This all did not have to be true. More predictions. The Tower of Babel account. We have found a single dispersal of all people in a relatively recent past traveling in small people groups into uninhabited territory through the Middle East. They call it the Out of Africa story, but these are all biblical-based predictions. Icing on the cake for biblical creation, more and more evidence. I can go on all day. Humans are fundamentally different from all other forms of life when we consider genomics and functionality. We see that genetic change is actually down and not up. We are therefore devolving due to mutation accumulation. Information in our genomes cannot arise via mutation and natural selection, as we now know that there exist multiple overlapping codes in our DNA. All you have to do is picture. Just imagine receiving an email and finding that it has 3 totally different messages, where you get one message when you read it normally, one evident message when read in reverse, and one when reading every other letter. This indicates data compression at the highest level, which extends far beyond any computer program ever written by man. And we're just beginning to understand the DNA language. The junk DNA era has been completely overturned and is no longer a valid form of evidence for evolutionists. Molecular clocks and other dating methods most consistently point to a young genome. There's actually plenty of evidence that man and dinosaurs coexisted, and there's also evidence that the Earth was once underwater. Quick detour, time to be a big boy now, guys. Now that we've seen just some of the evidence for biblical creation, it's time for evolutionists to grow up and quit believing in fairy tales. There never was a man named Peter Parker who was bit by a radioactive spider, giving him spider-like abilities. The original Spider-Man trilogy with Tobey Maguire swinging from building to building with his spider webs was a great trilogy and all, but it's just not true. You've been lied to. It's time to start believing the truth. Yes, there is evidence for biblical creation, and no, absolutely not. There is no evidence for pond scum to people and goo to you evolution. Devolution is what we observe. Evolution is not. This is what we expect given a biblical-based model. How much more time do I have, James?
You got 2 minutes and 45 seconds.
Beautiful. Michael Behe said in his book, Darwin Devolves, and it flows perfectly, Darwinian evolution proceeds mainly by damaging or breaking genes, which counterintuitively sometimes help survival. In other words, the mechanism is powerfully devolutionary. It promotes the rapid loss of genetic information. Laboratory experiments, field research, and theoretical studies all forcefully indicate that. As a result, random mutation and natural selection make evolution self-limiting. Darwin's mechanism works chiefly by squandering genetic information for short-term gain. Pond scum to people evolution is pure imagination. It's science to say that dogs produce dogs. It's not science. It's not empirical science to say that dogs, pine trees, bacteria, and whales are related. Evolutionists imagine that mutations make something new and better. Incremental changes is what they say. Evolutionists imagine that all these small-scale variations will eventually add up to make something we don't actually observe. Time, as I've always said, is the hero of the story for the evolutionists. Evolutionists are confused. They confuse adaptation to environments and evolution of higher life forms as if they were the same thing. Evolutionists, as I've said, they're confused. It doesn't take a genius to see that these are different issues. Adaptation can routinely be accomplished by loss of information, but the development of higher life forms always requires a large increase in net information. We're all actually mutant. We can see that genomes are devolving and the genome is rusting out like a car. Things are going down and not up. All modern scientific evidence points to the decay and destruction of an originally perfect design and creation. As I've said, empirical evidence suggests that everything, including all life, is subject to entropic decay. We observe devolution and not evolution. These near-neutral, low-impact, deleterious mutations, they're degenerating our information systems. Looking backward, the sad reality of this genetic degeneration demands a literal Adam, a literal Eve, and a literal fall. Just look at the decline in ages at death. We can actually see that the lifespan as recorded in Genesis strongly supports the historicity and truth of the Bible, and in particular, the book of Genesis. There's more and more evidence I could go through, but for now, that should be more than enough to give the fatal blow to evolutionary theory. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for that opening statement from Standing for Truth. We'll switch back over to the dialogue boxes, and I will set the timer for 10 minutes. And Godless Engineer, I will start the clock on your first word.
All right. Well, thank you, James, for having me here on Modern Day Debate. I really appreciate the chance to, I guess, defend evolution in this particular discussion. I also appreciate Standing for Truth for making the time to come here and debate me about it. Now, so my initial talk here is not going to be in rebuttal to Standing for Truth. Obviously, I was taking notes, but just keep in mind that none of this is meant to refute anything that he said directly. So I'm just going to kind of go through my notes and what I've written down. So one of the best things about any scientific theory is its ability to make predictions. And so if evolution is true, it's predicted that we should find evidence for evolution in a lot of different avenues. Today I'm going to try to go over biological evidence, fossil evidence, and direct observation. And just to note, it doesn't, well, like one particular piece of evidence or one particular avenue that you go down is not going to refute evolution outright. That's a ridiculous claim for anybody to make, that one single piece of evidence would totally topple all of evolution. So first, let's go through the biological evidence. We should see evidence for evolution in genetics in various ways. The driving force behind this is mutation of genes over generations of organisms. We have directly observed increased genetic variety in the population, increased genetic material, novel genetic material, and novel genetically regulated abilities. Mutations being the driving force of evolution is undeniably proven by modern science. Most of these mutations that occur are neutral. Some are harmful, but those are prevented from propagating throughout the species or the population. And it prevents them from passing it on. And then the good mutations that happen, those allow the organism to survive better in the environment that it's in. So that's about good mutations, bad and neutral ones. Now, there's also a thing called epigenetics, which plays a big role in evolution. In fact, epigenetics only makes sense with respect to evolution. Epigenetics plays into the adaptation that you see. And we can go over that in a little bit more detail if we want to later on in the discussion. But since it wasn't a primary thing in Standing for Truth's opening, I'll reserve that for later. Now, evolution takes a long time to occur. I know it was brought up in Standing's initial thing that time is very important to evolution, and it is, because all of these changes take place over millions of years, and it takes a long time for one animal or one organism to change into a completely different animal or organism. In order for the flood story to make sense, the animals on the ark would have to produce about 11 new species every single day. I mean, that is literally a cat pooping out a completely different animal, and other animals just creating new versions of themselves immediately on first birth, I guess. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So as far as the biological evidence goes, one big question that I have for Standing for Truth is, what do you mean by like a loss of specificity or a loss of information when it comes to genes? And also, what does genetic degradation actually look like? Because I'm really confused by those concepts, and it seems like you don't really have a very well-defined idea of what that actually means. Now, to go on to fossil evidence, there's a lot of fossil evidence for evolution. Our fossil record clearly shows an indication of different species temporally following each other through time. As mentioned before, we know whales, I mentioned that in my epigenetics talk thing, but whales evolved from quadruped ancestors that were land animals. And we know this because of the vestigial limbs that we find in both whales and dolphins. Now, evolution has also predicted that the fossil record would show different organisms living at different times. The geologic column is a perfect example of this. The geologic column is a product of uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism means that changes in the Earth's crust during our geological history have resulted from the action of continuous and uniform processes. This is how we actually observe everything to operate in reality for as long as we've been taking notice. But this results in fossils of animals appearing in specific layers of Earth that correlates to the time frame they lived in. And it seems reasonable enough, right? Uniformitarianism is the only viable explanation for why fossils are found where they are found. Considering the other explanation is that during a worldwide flood, multiple different layers of rock were laid down neatly on top of each other, and then each layer only contained certain types of animals, I feel like it's more probable that uniformitarianism and the geologic column being laid down over time is the actual situation. Using evolutionary theory and the geologic column, there have been numerous fossils that were predicted to be found and were subsequently found, like the transitional fossil between teethed and baleen whales. Tiktaalik's fossil was found in the same manner. They predicted where and approximately what layer of the Earth it should appear in, and they were able to find those fossils. Now, we also have direct observation, which evolutionary theory has a lot to predict. Now, in 2016, there was an experiment on bacteria by the Harvard Medical School that shows bacteria adapting to higher and higher concentrations of antibiotics. Now, evolutionary theory also predicts that flightless island birds descend from the nearest land-dwelling bird species, and that every island would have a species of flightless bird that is specific to that island. And this has found out to be true. Evolutionary theory has also predicted a number of different transitional fossils that were later found. We have also been able to predict specific traits that exist in these transitional fossils. And so how much time do I have, James?
You got 3 minutes exactly.
3 minutes. So if I can use this last few minutes to kind of go over, my whole point of this intro right here was to prove that evolution provides a predictable model that allows us to actually see things in reality, or to find things, or what to expect out of reality. And the reality of the situation is that evolution is true, and it does happen. The bacteria experiment proves that. Now, I would like to say that the use of evolutionism to make it some kind of like ism or ideology, I think, is quite disingenuous on Standing for Truth's part. Evolution doesn't ever try to talk about origins, like abiogenesis or anything like that. Evolution is just the change in a population of organisms over time, and that results in different species and just the diversity of life that we see. He also said that if there was never an Adam and Eve, that Christianity would be destroyed. I disagree with that. There's a majority of Christians today that don't consider Adam and Eve to be a historical people, and yet their faith is still intact, and Christianity is just fine. I think that you can take those as metaphorical and just be fine with it. He also said that the Bible is a history book of the universe. I would like to really disagree with that, considering that the fact that the Bible says that God spoke everything into existence, or he just turned a light on, or anything like that, when we actually know that after the Big Bang occurred, it was a few 100,000 years after that when the first light actually started. So it seems to me like it's not actually a history book of the universe. That's on top of all of the other problems that I have with Genesis and the Bible in general. Most of Standing for Truth's front end of his argument was just for the Bible tells me so. And I'll end with this, that if God did in fact make all of us and everything like that, then he laid down all of the evidence to point us in the direction of evolution. So that would make Standing for Truth's whole position a unfalsifiable narrative, meaning that you can't falsify anything he says because he's always got an excuse for why it's that way, and his excuse is God did it. And you can't come to truth by just saying God did it and explain it away like that. So I believe I'll end there.
You bet. Thanks so much. And next up, for the rebuttal phase, I have set the clock for 5 minutes. So, Standing for Truth, when you are ready, I will click start on your first word.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much there for your...
Forgive me. I just wanted to mention to the chat, I forgot to mention at the start, if you have a question for the Q&A, if you put @ModernDayDebate in the live chat and then let us know which debater or if it's for both debaters, that helps us, as we will then compile it into a list and ask as many as we can during the question and answer session at the end. And then, super chats. If you have a super chat, it also allows you to make a short comment towards one of the speakers to which they can give a response to. And then secondly, all of the super chats automatically go to the top of the list during the debate or during the Q&A. So with that, thanks for your patience. I will give you your full 5 minutes, Standing for Truth. I didn't mean to cut in on you. So on your first word, I will start the timer for 5 minutes.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that opening there, Godless Engineer. So I'll get right into it. It sounds like deep time is his rescuing device. That's kind of what I gathered from that opening. The more time we give Ponscum to evolution, Ponscum to people evolution to work its wonders, the more organisms become extinct. You know, time is not the hero of the plot for the evolutionists, as they'd like you to believe. It's actually... it's actually the enemy. And he talked about epigenetics, but epigenetics doesn't actually add new novel information in any way, shape, or form. It's just basic adaptation, and that's really it. You know, no new novel and meaningful information is gained. Only a gene is expressed, a pre-existing gene, of course. So I'd have to ask him to name, a single beneficial mutation, say in man, that's not somewhat deleterious, because for the most part, the ones he could point to, they're really just based on an epigenetic tag, and they're not actually beneficial mutations. When it comes to his species argument about 11 species per day, that's actually wrong, because number one, we only started to document these speciation events the last century, and we can go deep into the created heterozygosity hypothesis and talk about the speciation, what makes more sense of the origin of species, either the creation model or the evolutionary model in our discussion period. But the fact that we've just begun to document these speciation events, we actually don't know the real speciation events, and we've actually made testable predictions based on this model that we can get into, that we actually look to genome functionality. Faster mutation rates, for example, in the past, due to the bad environmental conditions of post-flood, would lead to rapid speciation hundreds of years after the flood. But in short, most species today already formed in the past. So the 11 species per year is not really an argument at all. And like I said, we look to the created heterozygosity hypothesis. God encoded these pre-existing functional DNA differences into the created kinds, into Adam and Eve, and through processes such as gene conversion, recombination, that could lead to new species quick. And like I said, he talked about testable predictions, and of course the gold standard of science is making these testable and falsifiable predictions. And we've made it on mutation rates, we've made it on DNA function, so I'm sure we can actually talk about that. We're past the whole God did it thing because of the the many testable and falsifiable predictions that we've made. For example, the tree that I always show that Dr. Nathaniel Jensen has derived based on mitochondrial DNA that points right back to Noah's 3 daughters-in-law makes testable predictions on the stamp of civilization. So we can also talk about that. Another thing I got written down here was his fossils and Tiktaalik and whales, for example. I mean, fossils are just circumstantial evidence that actually requires a theory to account for it. And when it comes to the information loss, we can look at, shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity. We can look at the fact that we accumulate 100 new mutations per person per generation. We can look at deletions. There's many different ways that we can actually calculate the information lot in a species. And he talked about how, mutations, a lot of them, they're not harmful, they're neutral, but that would misunderstand the entire point of, for one, genetic entropy, and two, neutral mutations in general. Because yes, most mutations are neutral from the perspective of the organism's physical fitness, right? The phenotype, of course, but all mutations must have effect on the genetic content, which is the genotype. So in no way are mutations truly neutral. All must have an effect on the genotype.
49 seconds.
So 49 seconds. So if you look at Tiktaalik, the claimed tetrapod traits, they're consistent with many living and extinct lobe-finned fish species today. And with the recent discovery of the Poland tetrapod tracts that actually predates Tiktaalik by nearly 20 million years, the evidence couldn't be any more clear. Tiktaalik is a bottom-dwelling lobe-finned fish. It's not actually a missing link to land animals. It's also important that creationists also predict and expect nested hierarchies. They expect mosaic creatures like Tiktaalik, like platypus, for example, and whales, the presumed, transitional forms he talks about, Pakicetus, Ambulocetus, Rhodocetus, they're highly questionable.
6 seconds.
The claim that these are all whale precursors is actually based more on speculation,
Time.
Storytelling, and wishful thinking. Thanks,
Time.
James.
Thank you very much, Standing for Truth. We will now kick it over to Godless Engineer. I have the clock set, and I will start it on your first word.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of work backward up from his last rebuttal right here, from what I got written down. He mentions about the footsteps or whatnot predating Tiktaalik. That actually wasn't my point in bringing up Tiktaalik as to point to the bridge between sea life and land animals. My point was that evolution, it has a predictable model, and using evolutionary model, they were able to predict where to find it and at what layer. So that validates evolution as being a good scientific theory for explaining like the diversity of life, because we are able to predict things using it. So that was the point in that. He said that there's no neutral mutations really, that it's all really deleterious or whatever. That's actually not true. I would say that any mutation that's neutral would be one that has no bearing on the fitness of that particular organism or that particular species. And there are scientific studies that have been done that show these neutral mutations and how they're mostly neutral. All of the mutations, the 100 that he talks about per generation, most of them are neutral. There are some that are bad, but those don't get carried throughout the organism. The good mutations that are shown are carried throughout it. Like, he wants an example of this, and I would say that our vision in general is a good way to know that these good mutations do happen. Because most mammals have poor vision, and so us having the color vision that we do and everything like that, that's actually a genetic mutation that happened in our particular lineage. There's a lot of other things like lactose tolerancy, our ability to drink milk and milk products. That was a mutation. Another thing is the color of your eye and stuff like that. So there are good mutations that have helped us in one way or another, or just exist. Like, for instance, the color of the eye. I would say that those are probably mostly neutral, especially now, mutations, because those don't actually help us survive or anything like that. Let's see. He claims that fossils are circumstantial evidence. I would highly disagree with this because he also cast doubt on the whole deep time and how that's kind of a sort of a saving grace for evolution. And it's not a saving grace for evolution, it's just part of our reality. I mean, in order to disagree with deep time and fossils in general representing things in our past, you would have to forego like a lot of different scientific principles, like radioactive decay. Radioactive decay, allows us to actually gauge how long something has been around. And there's multiple different versions of radioactive decay. It's not just the carbon dating that everybody likes to hear about. There's also other ways to date things that are in the millions of years old. And that's how we actually date the fossils. You can either date the actual fossil or the rock that it's contained in, or you can look at the geologic column and see at what level it is in the geologic column and get a good idea of right about the time when that animal died. And those corroborate each other, obviously. He talks about Noah's 3 daughters being like some kind of like mitochondrial ancestor or whatnot. If you actually go to the Wikipedia page for the I forget what they're called. I'm sure Standing can let you guys know. It's the L, M, and N things. If you actually go there, L was first. That's mitochondrial Eve, if I'm not mistaken. And then if you follow the tree down, M and N come in on the 3rd level, and those are only split off of the middle, like L3 and 4 or something like that, genes. So I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for those 3 women at the exact same time to be representative of all those 3 things. Not to mention the fact that those particular genes date back way farther than 6,000 years.
20 seconds left.
Okay. He talks about genomic decay and the loss of information. I still didn't hear a good explanation as to what this information is, or how, or what it would look like for something's DNA to decay or degrade. I still don't know what that actually means. So if he could enlighten me about that.
Thank you very much.
Also, DNA is not a code.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will move into the 25-minute open discussion. So this is always my favorite part. It's exciting, engaging, and setting the timer for 25 minutes. The floor is yours, gentlemen.
Awesome. Well, you know what? I think, I appreciate your rebuttal there. I think a good way to start it, since it's probably going to, consist of a large portion of our discussion, would be, because I heard you say that, evolution for the most part, at least biological evolution, would mean, a change in allele frequency or gene frequency in populations over generations. Would you agree with that as a valid definition for biological evolution?
Well, yeah, I think that's specific enough, I guess.
I mean, do you believe that there would be any types of limits to that, like whether it's genomic, physical limits? Like, do you believe, let's say, do you believe you can get a dog, say, ever as big as, say, an elephant or a whale? We know there's animals that exist that are as big as, say, elephants and whales, or even a dog as small as, say, a flea. We know there's insects that exist that are as small as a flea, like a flea. So do you believe there's any type of limits to the change?
Well, I mean, obviously there's limits, because how an organism is actually I guess built, if you will, it kind of dictates like how big it can get and whatnot. Like, you can never have a lizard as big as Godzilla. That's fantasy, obviously, but there's a lot of different limitations to that size. Things would have to work differently. But I also think that, just like with the fact that there are elephants and there are whales, if dogs started changing in that direction, they would just develop differently and be able to be that big, and they would no longer be dogs.
Right. So let's just say, if we look at what's empirically verified, like if we actually see, so I imagine you believe that, dogs, elephants, whales, pine trees and fleas are all related through common ancestry. But if we see, dogs today producing a variety of dogs, like obviously you got dogs that can adapt to heat, dogs that can adapt to the cold, but you're never going to get a dog to to grow wings and fly. It's just not in the genetic code. You can believe
Do
something
you seriously
like that,
think
but
that's
it's
what
not
evolution
scientific
is?
evidence. Go ahead.
I mean, do you seriously think that that's what evolutionary theory says?
What I want to know, no, I know that it's not going to say that a dog is directly, it's incremental changes over time, of course, because I know you.
Okay. Can I? Sorry to interrupt, Standing, but I need to know, why then would you characterize it as such a dramatic change if you know that's not what evolution is? That's a straw man fallacy. This is basic logic here.
Well, I'm
That's a
sorry to
straw
interrupt you.
man
No, I
fallacy.
don't believe it's a straw man, because at some point you believe there is a single-celled organism that evolved into a multi-celled organism, a fish, an amphibian, a bird, a monkey, a man. These incremental changes would require, because if we're talking about that type of microevolutionary variation, where you get that change in the frequency of the expression of different traits, me and you, we're not disputing that. And that type of evolution obviously explains the survival
No.
of this, but not the arrival of this. If we see dogs produce dogs, how can you say that a dog today came from something that was non-dog long ago and far away? Where's your empirical evidence for it? If you believe there's limits, of course.
Okay, so first I'll answer what you were talking about first. So we know this because of fossil evidence that we found. We've found fossils in the past that connect dogs to a proto-dog-like animal, and you can trace all of those all the way back. This is another thing that evolutionary theory predicts, is that we'll find fossil series. And so we know the evolutionary line of dogs and what came to be dogs, what we know dogs to be now. But still, you totally strawmanned evolution, and I can't let that go.
Well, I'm not really strawmanning it, because you just admitted that. I'm sorry to interrupt. You just admitted that. Well, obviously you're appealing to fossils. Yep.
1 sec. Just because I think there were maybe 2 points that you made. I want to give Godless Engineer a chance to respond to each one. I think there's...
Yeah, no. As long as you get equal time, and then I can address that as well. Go ahead.
All right, I'll let you. Just let me hold on. So, you characterized evolution as a dog producing a dog with wings. I mean, is that not how you characterized it?
Well, what I'm saying is obviously based on built-in genetic adaptation.
Yes or no questions,
dog. Well, you can take every single dog in the world today and throw them into Alaska, and they're going to adapt. You're going to see over time, you're going to see those traits that are emphasized. You're going to have a population of, say, something like a husky, or take those dogs and put it into the deserts of Australia. Over time, you're going to get those traits emphasized through natural selection, not random variation. You're going to see probably populations of dingoes, right? Short legs, skinny legs. But at the end of the day, you're still only going to get dogs producing more dogs. You're the ones that's saying dogs and elephants and pine trees are related through common ancestry, and you're looking to the fossil record, which I did say was circumstantial evidence, because if all we see is change that's opposite of what is required for that type of pond scum to people evolution, well, you can believe in it all you want, but I'm just telling you that it's not empirical verified science, because we don't observe. And you can appeal to time, of course, all you want, and you can appeal to the fossil record all you want, but what do we see in the fossil record? We see stasis for the most part. We see something like a coelacanth, which according to evolutionists is millions and millions and millions of years old, and then it just disappears in the fossil record for millions and millions of years, and all of a sudden there they are swimming in the ocean today. So there's a lot of inconsistencies with your claims on the fossil record. That's why I believe you might be able to cherry pick some, proto dogs, quote unquote. But at the end of the day, those proto dogs would still be considered a dog to any 5-year-old today. But you're the one that's saying a dog today actually came from something legitimately non-dog long ago and far away. And I'm here to tell you that that's okay to believe that, capital B. But clearly there are limits, genomic, physical. You admitted that. You did say, I think, that, a dog today probably could, given enough time, given enough change, become something as big as an elephant, but it's just not observable science. All we see is limits. That's consistent with, what we would believe based on, say, pre-existing heterozygosity, pre-existing genetic built-in adaptation. Just seems...
Okay, can we stop this Gish Gallop?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was waiting for you to stop, but you just kept on going. Okay? So, all right. Honestly, I can't even recall what you were talking about there, because you just kind of seemed to go off on a diatribe. You were denigrating the use of fossils, I would like for you to explain to me, like on your Bible model here, how do you explain all of the different fossils from extinct animals that look incredibly similar to the next species, and then the next species, and then the next species? Answer me, how does the Bible explain those extinct species? But then also, why is it that God has made a linear progression from one animal to another to make it look like they evolved from one another? What are those two things?
Okay, well, I appreciate the questions. First off, and I'll answer it as thoroughly as I can, I would say to weaken, the fossil evidence, that you're using. Obviously, fossils, bones found in the dirt, they're not inherited. Traits are inherited. That's why when we look to genetics, we see that it confirms biblical creation. But if you actually want to talk about how we explain the fossil record, well, of course, we explain, when you look at the geology of, say, the Earth, we would say, and I think it's pretty obvious, that, present processes can't in any way, shape, or form explain what we actually see. Rather, what we see points to, catastrophic processes in the past, which I would say, and you were kind of appealing to uniformitarianism earlier, but I think the catastrophic processes that we clearly see, with all the sedimentary layers and so on and so forth, that'd be confirmation of Noah's flood. I mean, I think all the evidence would point to, rapid plate tectonics and all the layers of fossils, all the fossils you actually see. The fact that we see stasis, that's strong indication that biblical creation would better explain it. And secondly, we would see burials by ecosystems. So I think that's better explained as compared to slow and gradual evolution and slow and gradual uniformitarianism. Go ahead.
Okay. Let me ask something real quick. Why is it that we only find certain fossils in certain layers? Why is it that we never find a fossil that is supposed to be older in the upper layers, like where it's younger, but we know that those particular organisms didn't exist at that time? Like, why aren't there any fossils of them trying to swim up through the geologic column? They're all laid down very nice and neat in a column, very ordered. Now, uniformitarianism can explain this. How does the Bible explain it? Because a flood does not actually explain it. You're not actually giving me any kind of explanations. You're just saying, oh, well, God did it, and that's it.
Well, I mean, I can give you a testable, falsifiable prediction based on what I talked about, catastrophic plate tectonics. I don't know if you'd agree, but I've had evolutionists agree that it does at least look like that there's evidence that the Earth was once underwater. I mean, if you want to talk about fossils, we see marine fossils on mountains and in landlocked areas that are actually far from the sea. And we see, sedimentary rock layers that actually extend, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, over entire continents or even farther. So it at least appears that the deposition of those layers, they had to have been catastrophic, or else there would not have been much fossilization to begin with. I mean, how do you explain fossils to begin with? What do you see? You see fossils of animals giving birth, fish being eaten. Doesn't that suggest sudden and rapid burial? I mean, it seems like all these observations, they are in accord with the biblical flood of Noah, which
so
covered
standing
the entire Earth thousands of years ago. I mean, that would be my answer. Go ahead.
Okay, so standing, how are mountains formed?
Well, we look to catastrophic plate tectonics to explain let's say Mount Everest or the Himalayas, for example, immediately post flood. We look to you would look to continental drift. We actually look to continental sprint, meters per second, continental sprint. And we actually have made a testable and falsifiable prediction. If you can kind of let me explain it, for example, we would say that...
But you haven't actually answered my question yet, so I'm a little agitated at this point.
I just told you through plate...
Okay, well, see, that's I mean, catastrophic plate tectonics is not how mountains are formed. Mountains are formed slowly over long periods of time when
exactly. But
as the plates.
That's how you think they're created.
No, this is
I'm
how
saying we looked at catastrophic plate tectonics. We looked at slow uniformitarian tectonics. I don't want to misrepresent me. Sorry,
just want to make sure you give him a chance to respond, Standing.
I just don't want to be misread. He's saying that mountains are formed from slow uniformitarian processes. I'm saying they're formed from fast uniformitarian, and I've actually made a testable falsifiable prediction.
Mountains do not shoot up from the ground, Standing.
Mountains formed by the uplifting and collisions of the plates as a result of catastrophic plate tectonics that I'm talking about. I mean, all rock layers have ripple marks, meaning there was a global flood in the past, and the flood sorted animals by ecosystems. Like I said, sea creatures first, then land creatures, as you would expect in a flood. That's exactly what we see. And I've got a testable, falsifiable prediction that has been confirmed to give you evidence for everything I'm saying. I mean, I can either give it to you or not, but the evidence seems to correlate perfectly with the flood of Noah. I mean, I've answered your questions. You just don't seem to like it because you still have that uniformitarian assumption. Unfortunately.
Oh, you mean the mainstream science explanation of it? Yeah.
Well, the thing is, high mountains cannot reach that high unless a catastrophe with meters per second movement, not slow, gradual inches per second per year, like you're talking about. Uniformitarian.
What evidence do you have for that statement? Have you seen a mountain form immediately, like right in front of you, or something like that? Like, have you seen that happen or something?
Well, the global flood is an unrepeatable, unobservable event. That's why we've made a testable, falsifiable prediction. For example, these continents, according to the Bible's description of the fountains of the great deep breaking open, these continents are moving at rapid paces through the floodwaters. So the pre-flood ocean crust, it's dragged down into the mantle core. We call that subduction process, of course. But the prediction comes into play when the cold ocean crust should actually still be cold, since obviously, according to our model, this occurred only thousands of years ago, even though it has descended into the deep hot mantle. So seismic data actually, and you can look this up to yourself, I can provide the paper from NASA, it's actually revealed enormous slabs of cool rock that are under North America. So down in the core itself, what I'm saying, which should be warm, it's actually confirmation of flood geology. And we've seen rapid magnetic reversals, also confirmation of the flood. So everything I'm saying, it's not just a just so story.
I don't see how that's confirmation of a flood happening. Can I ask like a totally different question?
Like, do you want to move off the topic of, if you want to move off flood geology for now and go back to, because you can ask me another question, but then I want to ask, because I kind of noticed that you didn't really address much of my opening presentation in regards to mitochondrial Eve.
When have I had time, Standing?
Well, in your rebuttal period, wasn't that to address my opening? Because in my rebuttal period, I addressed your opening for the most part.
How many minutes did we get for our rebuttal, Standing? 5 minutes? You expect me to go through all of your claims and everything like that in 5 minutes?
But
I don't have the luxury of just being like, God did it.
But the thing is, that was well, for one, I've already shown you that my explanations are not based on God did it, and even the speciation.
Actually, that's the only thing that you have said. You have said that, oh, the geologic column, the thing that we said there, how'd that happen? Oh, God did it. And how do you say that? Oh, the flood did it, which God did. And then everything else has been because God did it.
I've given you testable and falsifiable predictions that actually confirm what I'm saying.
How are they falsifiable? Give me one of the things that you have said. Tell me how it's falsifiable.
Okay, why don't we go into the pre-existing heterozygosity model, for example? We would
no, flood. We were talking about flood. You want to stay on flood. Let's do flood. Tell me, how were your statements falsifiable?
The statements that I just told you about the global flood being falsifiable in regards to the catastrophic plate tectonics model, if you want me to go into it again, we would predict, based on the fact that the fountains of the Great Deep broke open and that we're looking to catastrophic plate tectonics versus slow and gradual uniformitarian processes. For one, the mountains that I'm talking about that are formed from the uplifting and the collisions of the plates as a result of this, we've made a prediction. So we predicted that the cold ocean crust, if our model is true, it should still be cold, since this occurred only thousands of years ago. So we
how is that falsifiable? Tell me, how is that falsifiable?
It would be falsifiable if we were to test that, okay, as we made the actual prediction about the cold ocean crust being still cold because it's only occurred thousands of years ago. If that wasn't true, it actually was warm or hot like it should be down in the core itself, that would falsify the actual theory. But what we've seen based on seismic data from NASA, it's revealed enormous slabs of cool rock under North America. So that was a confirmation of catastrophic plate tectonics. I mean, it's right in the Bible, fountains of the Great Deep.
How does that prove it? I mean, I'm not really seeing the actual proof here as far as it being distinguished from the scientific model, because we're far off from like the evolutionary model at this point. Okay, this is geology and shit. So now, how is that different from the evolutionary model or the scientific model? in general, because on the scientific model, the Earth formed 4.5 billion years ago, and then the Earth's crust cooled sometime
obviously
later.
there's a lot of storytelling.
Hold on. I'm not finished, Standing. I'm not finished. I want to hear what you got to say, but let me finish. And then it cooled, and then like the oceans eventually came about, and continents and everything like that, and then plate tectonics were there, which there are actually still like lava that spews out from the seabed floor on occasion. That's how some islands were even formed. So I'm trying to figure out here how that particular prediction is actually in favor of your model and against the regular scientific model, because I don't really like, I don't see you refuting the current scientific model. I just see you planting your flag saying, oh, this proves God.
Okay, well, here, let me go. So you're the one that brought up fossils. You're asking me, how do I explain the fossil record? How do I explain the geology according to my model? Then we talked about mountains, and I'm telling you that high mountains cannot reach that high unless a catastrophe with meters per second movement, according to the catastrophic plate tectonic model, were to occur, not the slow, gradual inches per second per year that you're actually talking about. I've given you a testable prediction that's actually been confirmed, and you can actually look at the articles that actually support this seismic data. So I'm explaining to you how, I mean, obviously we veered off of, say, genetics and evolutionary theory, towards this, but I've now given you a testable prediction based on the fact that the fountains of the Great Deep break open, the Earth is fractured like an eggshell. We look to this model of catastrophic plate tectonics, and there's your confirmed prediction. So in regards to that, that would confirm flood geology. If we want to look to genetics, if we want to look to... Go ahead. I don't know how much more I can... I mean, you asked for evidence. You're the one who brought up in your opening, science, empirical science. It's all about testable and falsifiable predictions. So that's what I'm...
Actually, I didn't say anything about that. I said that one of the key factors of any scientific theory is its predictability, the ability of the model or the theory to predict things that we would find in reality. That's what I actually said.
Well, okay, let me ask you in regards to, say, evolutionary theory, predictability, how much of our genome would you predict or would you say is functional? Like, do you have from what I've heard from evolutionists, it's a maximum of between 10 and 20%. Do you have a number that you can put on that?
Well, I mean, if you're just going to answer the question that you just asked me, I don't even know why you're even trying to get an answer out of me.
Well, because what I'm saying is...
It's pointless to ask a question and then immediately give my answer to it. I'm not saying that is my answer, because honestly, I don't know. And it's fine for me not to know. But the fact that however much of our genome is functional or whatever, that doesn't dispute all of the other evidence out there. It doesn't dispute anything, actually. It's just a statement that I don't know is even true.
Well, no, because genetics is actually where we can look to verify the, competing hypotheses, and DNA function.
That's a good point to bring up. Explain the loss of information.
Well, for one, okay, I want to at least finish this because for the audience sake, I want to show them that we do have testable predictions in regards to DNA function. So if you don't want to give us, your answer to how much you believe that it is functional, we've already made predictions.
How is that going to help the conversation right now? I really don't understand, like, how me telling you how much of our DNA is functional.
Because I want us to have a good discussion on hypotheses, and we want to test those hypotheses to see whose model is stronger. And I'm saying that we've predicted, based on our speciation model of pre-existing functional DNA differences, that we predict that the vast majority of our genome is actually going to be functional. We can see already that based on, say, for example, the ENCODE project, which has given us evidence that over 80% of our genome is at least transcribed in RNA, which suggests function. A lot of it is, preliminary, but certain developmental windows were not tested during that. So we've actually put on paper this hypotheses and the predictions that flow from it. So you can actually go in the lab and test it yourself. That's why I'm asking you, okay, so we've made this prediction. The vast majority of our DNA differences, whether it's nuclear DNA differences, mitochondrial DNA differences, are functional. You can make a prediction as well, and then we can go test it, and that's what science is all about. So that's why if you don't think that that's going to progress our discussion, we are talking about models here. So I think we should put forth competing explanations and hypotheses and then test them. Would you not agree?
I don't understand how we can test them here just for us. I mean, I am not fluent in that particular part of genetics, so maybe I can get back to you later. But what I can tell you right now is that whatever point that you're trying to make right here is not actually going to help you in the genetic debate. Because, I mean, can you please, I just really need to know before we're done with this conversation, what exactly is a loss of information concerning DNA, and also what does genetic degradation look like?
Okay, so if you want to get into that, I'm just going to add the other portion by saying that, and then I'll answer that question directly. Is the fact that evolutionists predicted a genome of junk, while we predict high levels of function, and now the trajectory is pointing us towards high levels of function. For example, as ENCODE has revealed. So I'm just saying that our model.
I disagree with everything that you just said, because I really don't think that is what evolution predicts. Genome of junk. So,
well, of course, evolutionary leftovers, genome fossils, of course, that's what they predict. But we can move on if that's what you'd like. So if you're looking at, what was that? Did you say something?
If Godless Engineer is finished, then I'll not interrupt you. Otherwise, if there was something you wanted to add, I just want to make sure that he got to have his say back as well.
No. How much time do we have in the discussion portion? I just want to make sure we got enough time for this.
Minute 15.
Okay, then for that exact question, we know it's a fact, and hopefully you agree with it, that we transmit a small amount of mutations to our children. It's generally known that the mutation rate is now 100 mutations per person per generation. How much of those is near neutral and neutral is debatable, and we could probably talk about that for hours and hours, but we can actually look at certain mutations like duplications, inversion mutations, deletions. We can look at shifts from
45. I've got to forgive me. Just so Godless Engineer gets the last 45 seconds or so of the live discussion, I just want to interject. Just forgive me. I know that you're trying to give a response. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that it's roughly fairly balanced.
No problem. So to make it short, to measure, information loss, we can look at shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity. We can look at deletions in the genome. A deletion in a genome implies that something has been lost. And I know it's an evolutionary tactic to avoid the fact of genetic degeneration by saying, well, what does that mean, loss of information? Well, we know that all mutations are deleterious. We know that beneficial mutations are overwhelmingly rare. I mean, everybody admits that. So that is what we see as a loss of information. Go ahead. I'll give you the remaining time.
Scott, about 45 seconds.
Okay, so actually everything that he said there about genes, mutations, everything is completely wrong. I still don't know what loss of information means, because it's a lot like saying, oh, Diet Coke is a loss of information from regular Coke. It's not different. It's not a loss of information. They're just different things. They're different chemicals. And that's basically what it boils down to, is that genes or DNA is a chemical. And differences in that chemical between one chemical and another person's chemical is not a degradation or a loss of information. It's just a change in genes. So I don't know what this degradation actually looks like. I don't know what loss of information looks like.
Okay, well, if you want to deny the fact that a deletion of a DNA letter is not a loss of information.
Standing, I'm sorry. We'll let you respond during your closing. I know that you have a response, and that's why I feel terrible. I know that each of you guys always has a rejoinder in the barrel ready to be shot, but I just want to make sure that we keep on going with the format. With that, we do have 4-minute closings, and we had started with Standing for Truth. So Standing for Truth, if you want to carry your conversation right over into that format, you're welcome to. I will set the timer for 4 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Okay. Well, you know what? Evolutionists like Godless engineer here, they have to avoid the fact of admitting that, there is genetic degeneration, because evolutionists, they assume that mutations, for example, that they're the creator, but we know they're the destroyer. Mutations are not construction, they're destruction. That's what we see. They assume that these mutations have a net neutral effect, which we now know is wrong. And the major problem here, and he gave us some examples of, lactose intolerance and all these things, which can all be explained either through a loss of information, and he wants to know what a loss of information, for example, what that is. But the best beneficial mutations, they're mostly reductive. I'll give them an example. Sickle cell anemia, for example, it has a significant impact, but it's a broken gene, it's a broken protein. In the long run, it's not taking things forward. If he wants to take his fish to fishermen, if he wants to take his particles to people, he's going to have to take things forward. There needs to be a net gain in information, and all we see is a net loss of information. For example, natural selection, no one disagrees with that. Beneficial mutations, of course, are mostly reductive, as I've shown here with sickle cell anemia. If it's a broken gene and a broken protein, that implies a loss of some kind. So it's an evolutionist tactic to avoid the obvious data by asking, questions like, well, what is a loss of information? I mean, that is exactly what we see, is 100 new mutations per person per generation. Beneficial mutations are rare anyway. Sometimes I just say, give them 1 or 2 beneficial mutations, because 1 or 2 rare beneficial mutations are not going to counterbalance the information lost. He did bring up, I'm trying to touch on everything. He did bring up, radioisotope dating, and that's used to date igneous rocks. And these are rocks which, form when hot molten material cools and solidifies. And the radioisotope dating, for example, the clock, it starts when a rock cools. And once the rock cools, there's assumption there that the more atoms can escape, and any daughter element found in a rock will be the result of radioactive decay. But the dating process then requires measuring how much daughter element is in a rock sample, and then knowing the decay rate. For example, uranium into lead or potassium. But these are all based on assumptions, okay? Obvious, unknowable assumptions. For example, the initial conditions of the rock sample are accurately known, or the amount of parent or daughter elements in a sample has not been altered by processes other than radioactive decay. I've given actual evidence in genetics. Bones found in the dirt, they're not inherited. Traits are. I've given testable, falsifiable predictions on flood geology, catastrophic plate tectonics. What do the rock layers show? Ocean waters flooded over the continents. Evidence? Well, we see marine fossils in rock layers covering the continents, widespread, rapidly deposited rock layers. More evidence, the rock layers that can actually be traced all the way across continents and even between continents. And I look to the ENCODE project that
38 seconds.
How much? 30 seconds?
38 seconds.
38 seconds. Hopefully in his closing, he can actually address, the evidence that I gave about a literal Adam, a literal Eve, the 3 major haplogroups. I mean, these 3 LMN, they're unique. They're separated by small differences, and the lines radiating out, they're long, indicating, more differences. And we've made predictions based on the placement of the L. And all of this, all of genetics points to a biblical-based model and points away from an evolutionary model. Thanks so much, James.
Thank you, Standing for Truth, for your closing statement. And Godless Engineer, I've got the clock set at 4 minutes for you. I'll start on your first word.
All right. So I think that mostly what I've heard here tonight, which Standing will disagree with, is basically God did it. God made all of these things in the ways that they are, and therefore, because the Bible says so, it is so. And I feel like that's what his argument boils down to. And any of his supplemental evidence or information is only used to back up the biblical model. And so that's why I feel like he's using a lot of pseudoscience here in order to justify his position on the matter of evolution. He wanted me to go over like the Adam and Eve thing. You know, it's funny that he mentions that because there's actually not enough genetic diversity in only two individuals for spawning an entire population of a species. So, you're going against a lot of genetic information, like a lot of genetic studies and a lot of basic like science that you would have to forego in order to make the assumption that there literally were only two humans that started out and created by God or whatnot. And if you disagree with that, which I'm assuming that you do, they're standing for truth. Then I would want you to tell me, what does the perfect human look like to you? Starting out, like what did Adam and Eve look like exactly? They were so perfect that they were able to, spawn an entire population of organisms just off of them two. Also, I would love to hear exactly how that population, like that repopulation effort worked there, both for Noah and for Adam and Eve. But anyways, Standing for Truth likes to speak of DNA as if it were a computer system or a computer language. DNA is chemistry. And so it is bound by the laws of chemistry and therefore acts in a chemical way. So the information that he's talking about here are different chemicals that appear in DNA. And there's a lot of different processes that go into how DNA is both read and generated and copied and all of that. And so him saying that it's information, like it's some kind of like computer code, is really disingenuous and does not actually represent what DNA actually is. I didn't hear any good explanation as to what a loss of information is. He brought up sickle cell anemia, which is a genetic mutation that results in a disease that is not survivable. But I mean, I would lump that into the bad mutation part with whatever kind of extra things that may come with sickle cell anemia. If it affects the survivability, it would be considered a bad mutation and detrimental to the organism.
A minute 5 left.
5 seconds?
No, it was a minute and 5 seconds.
Oh, minute and 5. Okay. So I didn't really hear a good description of what genomic decay is, or what like gene degradation is, or what does it look like for an organism's genes to degrade. I mean, honestly, you would expect to see, like, I guess, a lot more of genetic diseases and stuff come about, maybe. But even then, on the evolutionary model, you would expect to see those types of changes in a population, especially with how many people there are on the Earth, and the fact that we've moved into an era of humanity where natural selection no longer has a direct effect on our survivability. So, another thing is that he uses this genetic entropy, like I was talking about before, and one of the foremost proponents of it, Sanford, actually acknowledges that experiments have not borne any data that indicates genetic entropy.
Excellent. We are just in time, so thanks so much, Godless Engineer, for your closing as well.
All right, heathens. Well, I'm glad that you guys have stuck with me so far. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. How did I do? How did Standing do? I still feel like what his argument boils down to is God did it. God is at the basis of his argument. And while he says that his arguments are falsifiable or his predictions are falsifiable, I don't find them to actually be falsifiable. One thing that I noticed during the debate is that whenever I asked him to tell me how it's falsifiable or tell me what would falsify it, he never actually gave me an answer to that. He just sort of danced around what he had already said. I'm guessing because actually telling me how it's falsifiable would have been off script. But, that's just me and everybody else that saw the debate. So at the very beginning of the debate, he talks about how it's evolutionism, trying to make it out to be something that it's not. That really bothered me the entire debate, as well as him thinking that evolution says anything about origins or anything like that. Like, Yeah, origin of biological life, like as far as how biological life has changed on the planet since biological life came into being. But he wants to extend it past that into like abiogenesis and even Big Bang territory. And I feel like that's pretty disingenuous too. So I don't know if you guys noticed, but a lot of his evidence, at least his primary evidence, was for the Bible tells me so. if you guys, I'm sure that I got the apologia for the Bible tells me so thing, because I think he did that up on his channel just for people to use or something. I'm gonna get it from him. But anyways, so it's pretty much for the Bible tells me so. One thing that I believe I brought up in the debate was the idea that two people could have produced an entire population of a species, and I find that to be very interesting, because that's not actually what genetics shows. Genetics shows us. Genetics actually shows us that if there are only two of a certain species, that is actually not enough genetic diversity in order to get an entire population of a single species. He claims that genetic similarities in human DNA actually points to Adam and Eve, and this is actually not true at all. I mean, it points to us being of the same species, but that's about it. So similar DNA would not point to that. Ironically, though, I like how he doesn't consider us apes in general, which later on in the debate, he talked about how the genetics show that we're not related to chimpanzees or chimps, or we're not copied from them or something. We're not similar is what he said. So, I mean, we are similar to other apes in the great ape family, because we ourselves are still great apes, and we evolved from a proto-ape. And he doesn't want to actually acknowledge that. I guess it's because we look different or something like that. I'm not sure. Yes, honey, it does fuck with his God story. Oh, another big thing that he was doing was he kept talking about de-evolution, which is kind of a made-up word. There is no de-evolution. You can't de-evolve out of something. You just evolve further. So I don't know what his concept of de-evolution is. I don't know how, like, Adam and Eve were such superior versions of humanity that now we're a diluted mess or something, or we're de-evolving from that higher state. Not going to try to figure out what the fuck he was talking about. In the debate, he also really talked about DNA as like computer code or whatnot, and DNA is really just chemistry. I mean, it has no code. Like, there is a code that we can interpret, and we know how that chemically, like, reacts. But at the same time, DNA operates differently than computer code or any other kind of machine thing, because it's chemistry. Like, it has to operate inside the laws of chemistry and all that. So, I mean, I can understand why people like him, apologists, would want to paint it as some kind of computer code or information system, but it's really not. It's a chemical. He also claimed that evolution is self-limiting, and I really don't see the self-limiting nature of evolution, because evolution is just a change in a population over time that eventually ends up with different species depending on how those changes affect the organisms in that population. So I don't see how this is self-limiting. I only see it limiting when, bad mutations crop up, and those are not as prevalent as he would like to make them out to be, which he thinks, of course, this is going off of like really bad science, pseudoscience, to which the actual proponent of the genetic entropy and all of that, he doesn't actually find any data in real world observations to support his genetic entropy. So it's kind of funny that Standing still goes with this particular line, because the evidence actually doesn't support him on it. But anyways, evolution's not self-limiting. That's pretty much the basics for that. I do like how he said that fossils are circumstantial evidence, when at the same time he's just making wild-ass assertions using the Bible and then trying to look for the answer in real life. And when this comes back around to falsifiability, because there are studies and actual scientific knowledge that falsifies all of his information, but yet he still claims that it's falsifiable and it has not been falsified. Just like his whole mountains, like how mountains form and everything like that. I mean, there's actual science out there that supports the position of mountains, forming slowly, because that's how plate tectonics work. Like, there's actual science to refute him. And so his ideas are falsifiable, but the problem is that they have already been falsified. Also, he has a really bad idea of what radioactive decay is. I didn't really get to address this much in the debate, but he talked about radioactive decay as having all of these holes and uncertainty and everything, and it basically boils down to a big guessing game with it. That's not true at all. Before we could directly measure how much of a particular element is in whatever sample, we were actually testing for beta waves and stuff like that, like radiation that was coming off of it. And so we were able to detect those things, and from that we can determine how old it is. So there are checks and balances for radioactive decay and determining age of very old things. Alright, heathens, well, that's all of my thoughts for the debate. I would love to hear yours, though, so please do leave those down in the comments below. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice, and I will see you heathens later.